Hello, welcome into another Year 11 history lesson. We're looking at our GCSE unit, the development of the United States from 1929 to 2000. Really excited to tell you about today's topic, the Little Rock Nine, something you may have heard like a little bit about, but don't worry if you haven't. Let's find out the truth. But before we do that, let's recap what we did last time, which is really important because it really informs today's lesson, and that's the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. So fire up your low stakes quiz, please. Pause the video, complete it, and then come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. We are looking, remember, at this civil rights aspect of our course. If you want a bit of support, a bit of help with it, fire up the knowledge organizer, which you can see in the video description. We're looking at page 3 and page 4. We're on page 3 today, and we're looking at box 11, the Little Rock 9. There's also at the back, of course, the vocab list. So we're looking at the civil rights movement, and we're right in the middle of it now. We're in the mid-1950s. We're actually staying in 1957 here with the Little Rock Nine during the presidency of the Republican President Dwight Eisenhower. He's going to have a role in today's lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to start to explain this photograph. This photograph is a very famous, rightly very famous photograph of the events surrounding these people called the Little Rock Nine. And we're going to start to unpick a little bit of what's going on here. This is today's lesson title. How did the Little Rock Nine force integration in the South? Remember, integration is the opposite of segregation when people are brought together. I'd like to write down that title now, please. Pause if you need more time to do it before we move on. So where did we leave things last lesson? Well, we saw that in the southern states, when the Supreme Court decided in Brown versus Board of Education that segregation in schools was unconstitutional and illegal, and therefore that the states should desegregate their schools by bringing black and white students together, people in the South, like George Wallace, promised a campaign of massive resistance to what the Supreme Court had said. In other words, they are not going to do what they're told. We saw, didn't we, at the end of last lesson, that this was a very popular decision in the South. People did not want segregated schools. White people did not want segregated schools. Why were the Southern governments able to do this? Well, it's because, remember we looked at the start lesson, in the first lesson of this course, how in America there's the federal government, the government of all the states. So that's like the president and the Supreme Court and the Congress. They make all the big decisions that affect the whole country. But then each of the states, Texas, New York, Arkansas, Kansas, they have their own state governments with their own leaders called the governor, who make decisions about some things, for example, healthcare and education. So even though the federal government had said it's illegal to have segregated schools, the federal government didn't have any power over the schools themselves. It was up to the states to decide that. Governors of southern states refused to desegregate their schools. They said, I can see that the Supreme Court is telling me to do it. I'm just not going to do it. And you don't have the power to stop me because the schools are part of my power. I am the governor of a certain state. I don't want desegregated schools. So the NAACP and African Americans set about trying to force the governors of southern states to desegregate the schools. This was going to be a long and difficult process, but it reaches a climax in this event called the Little Rock Nine. Called the Little Rock Nine. Let's deal with the Little Rock thing first. Little Rock is the state capital of Arkansas. Arkansas is a southern state here. So here we were in Kansas last time. Now we're in Arkansas. And after the Supreme Court Board versus Education, Brown versus Board of Education decision was reached, Arkansas elected itself a new governor, this man called Orville Faubus, or Forbus, and he was elected because he promised to not integrate the schools. You can see him here, campaign pledge. I am against the racial integration of all schools within the Little Rock School District. Tick here to vote for me. So if you don't want black children coming to my school or your school, then vote for me. Forbus had promised that. Who were the nine? The nine were 9 students who had been selected by the NAACP, that's the organization that's campaigning for black rights. They'd been selected because they had perfect grades at their schools. They were academically very able, they were very polite, the kind of students that every head teacher or teacher would want to have in their school. They were black. They were going to be a test case. They knew they were going into a difficult situation. They enrolled to start school in September 1957 at Central High School in Little Rock, which is an all-white high school in the center of the city. They knew they were going to face opposition. They were trying to provoke a response. They were known, because there were 9 of them, and they were in Little Rock, as the Little Rock 9. I'm going to show you a video clip of what happened. But before we do that, I just want to pick out a few of the characters and some of the keywords you're going to hear in the video to help make a bit more sense. Firstly, you've already heard about this person, the governor of all the state of Arkansas, Farbus. He is against integration. He doesn't want black children going to schools to white schools in his state. Now, as we found out in the first lesson, the state governor has kind of like troops that he can call on. They're called the National Guard. So they are like the Arkansas soldiers, and they are controlled by Farbus. He can decide what he wants to do with them. So in red here, Farbus and the National Guard, they are the Arkansas kind of people. Now, as we're going to see later on in this event, the federal government, the government of all America, gets involved. We're going to see this president for the first time, President Dwight Eisenhower, who had been the leader of the American forces in Europe during the Second World War. He was a general. He's going to get involved. And he's also going to have some of his own soldiers to wield around. And in his case, the 101st Airborne. So they were the soldiers controlled by Eisenhower. They are a unit of the American army. They're like elite soldiers. These are the soldiers that had marched into Hitler's bunker, Hitler's house in the Alps in the Second World War to liberate Germany from the Nazis. The fact that, as we're going to find out, Eisenhower is sending these soldiers who had fought against racism in Germany into the South to fight against racism there is quite significant. So let me play this clip. When we're done, we'll do a few activities to make sure we got the story down.
The night before school opened, Farbus made a decision.
On an integrated basis, I have therefore, in accordance with the solemn responsibilities and the oath of my office, taken the following action. Units of the National Guard have been and are now being mobilized with the mission to maintain or restore the peace and good order of this community. Advanced units are already on duty on the grounds of Central High School.
The Arkansas National Guard ringed the school with orders to admit only the white students. It shocked the country. State troops were now being used to prevent enforcement of federal law. At the center of the crisis were these 9 teenagers, selected by the school board because of their excellent grades. The first day, 8 of the 9 went to school together, accompanied by their parents and ministers. They expected some harassment, but no real trouble. The 8 children and the adults with them were turned away by the National Guard. The 9th student, Elizabeth Eckford, had missed the call to gather with the others before school. Elizabeth Eckford walked alone and met a mob. The black parents and the NAACP went back to court. The leader of the state organization, Daisy Bates, became the students' strongest supporter. The national NAACP saw this case as a showdown for desegregation, and they assisted the local lawyers.
Well, we consider this case important as one of the segregation cases, but in addition to the fact that this one involved the appearance of the National Guard on the scene, And for the first time in any of our cases, it's the action of the governor that eventually will have to be brought into court.
Then you see it as a state-federal conflict of authority.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that.
The question was whether the federal government would assert its authority. The pressure on the president increased. Defiance of federal law seemed to be spreading. From Little Rock, here to North Little Rock, to Nashville, Tennessee, and to Charlotte, North Carolina. Some people blamed Eisenhower for this resistance, saying his lack of leadership on civil rights encouraged the extremists. In mid-September, the president and the governor had a meeting at Eisenhower's vacation home in Newport, Rhode Island.
The president thought that he had persuaded Governor Faubus to go back and allow the black children to enter the high school peaceably. It was quite a surprise to him. He felt let down when Governor Faubus decided against allowing the black children to enter the high school.
Eisenhower had convinced Faubus that ultimately the state could not resist federal authority. Faubus changed his tactic. He simply removed the National Guard, leaving only city police in an explosive situation as the Little Rock Nine entered Central High School.
We entered the side of the building, thousands of people out front. And we were entering the side, and I could just get a glimpse of this group. And on the car, I could hear, on the car radio, I could hear that there was a mob. And I knew what a mob meant. And I knew that the sounds that came from the crowd were very angry. So we entered the side of the building very, very fast.
We've just got a report here on this end that the students are in. That's right. Turn the TV down that way, Don, down there. You can see from here some of the action occurring down there.
The mob was getting past the wooden sawhorses because the policemen would no longer fight their own in order to protect us. And so someone made a suggestion that if they allowed the mob to hang one kid, they could then get the rest out. And a gentleman, whom I believe to be the assistant chief of police, said, "How are you going to choose? You're going to let them draw straws." He said, "I'll get them out." And we were taken to the basement of this place. And we were put into two cars, grayish blue-colored Fords. And the man instructed them, he said, "Once you start driving, do not stop."
The rioting was headline news. The nation and the world saw unmistakably the face of resistance. Finally, President Eisenhower realized he had to act, and he did quickly. That night, he sent in the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division.
An extreme situation has been created in Little Rock. This challenge must be met, and with such measures as will preserve to the people as a whole their lawfully protected rights. If resistance to the federal court order ceases at once, the further presence of federal troops will be unnecessary, and a blot upon the fair name and high honor of our nation in the world will be removed. Mob rule can not be allowed to override the decisions of our courts.
So, this is the story of the Little Rock Nine. Faubus tries to use the National Guard to stop children going to school. Literally rings the school with National Guardmen. There's an angry white mob that's threatening violence against these 9 model black students. And eventually, it's so embarrassing for America, Eisenhower decides that he's going to send soldiers to the south into his own country to force Faubus and the school to admit the black students. Imagine being the black students going into that school. If you feel stressed out at school, you're not as stressed out as those guys were. Soldiers had to stay make sure the students were safe for a year. The Little Rock Nine went to school with soldiers with machine guns to protect them for a year. It's so important because the president had acted on the side of African Americans against the racist white Southerners. This was a huge change in American history. Let's make sure before we go on that we've understood the story of the Little Rock Nine. So in your book, this is what I'd like you to do. There's 6 sentence stars here on the left-hand side in red. I'd like you to write those out and then match up the end of the sentence. It's been jumbled up for you there in blue, just like we did last lesson. So pause the video now and come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. Here are your answers. Pause the video one more time. Pause the video now and just mark your work. Check you've got those 6 sentences in the right order and you've got the correct endings on the start of the sentence. Okay, let's think now about significance. Why were these students, the Little Rock Nine, significant in the struggle for civil rights? What was it about this event that was so significant? Well, let's talk about a few things. Firstly, as I said before, Eisenhower, he's the president. For the first time, he's using the power of the presidency to support civil rights. He's saying that the president is on the side of African Americans, and that was huge for the NAACP. Secondly, we're going to talk a little bit next lesson about peaceful protest. This was a peaceful protest, right? African Americans were not getting violent or angry. In fact, they were showing that the other side was violent and angry. And just by using children, like innocent children, to be the face of their movement, they were showing that peaceful protest could be effective. Also, some black children, Little Rock Nine, and people who came after them were getting a better education with all the benefits that had. And just as before with Brown versus Board of Education, the Little Rock Nine, where it shows us is just the level of opposition to civil rights in the South. That people were willing, like that woman in the photo we saw at the start, to scream and shout and to threaten violence against 13, 14, 15-year-olds who just wanted to go to school. Okay, this is what I'd like you to do. I want you to write down that question there. It's in the middle. You can do bullet points or you can do a spider diagram. What can you remember? Why were the Little Rock Nine significant? Pause the video now. Come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. These are the 4 points you need to make. You can pause the video if you need to tick them off. Make sure you've got them in the right place. Add in any that you missed. Once you've done that, you can fire up your exit ticket and you are done with today's lesson.